The biker's steel-toed boot connected with the German shepherd's ribs. The dog yelped. The veterinarian screamed, throwing herself over her injured patient. The biker laughed, raising his boot again.
Don't you dare!
That's when he heard the footsteps. Fast. Purposeful. He turned and saw a man in a worn jacket sprinting toward them, his face a mask of controlled fury. The biker pulled his gold-plated gun, aimed it at the stranger's chest, and grinned. He had no idea he'd just signed his own death warrant. The man running toward him wasn't just some hero, he was Delta Force. Before we begin, tell us wherever in the world you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The small town of Ridgway, Montana, was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where the local diner served the same menu it had for 40 years, where the mountains stood like ancient guardians in the distance, their peaks dusted with early autumn snow. It was a town built on trust, on handshakes, and on the unspoken rule that you looked out for your neighbor. But something had changed in Ridgway over the past 6 months. Something dark had rolled into town on chrome and leather. They called themselves the Iron Jackals, a motorcycle club that had transformed from weekend riders into something far more sinister. What started as a local chapter of bike enthusiasts had been taken over by a new president, a man named Colt Branson, and under his leadership, the Jackals had become a plague. They ran protection rackets, they dealt drugs, they intimidated local business owners, and the worst part? They did it all in plain sight, because Colt's father was Judge Harold Branson, the most powerful man in the county. No one could touch them. No one dared to try. Until the day a quiet stranger drove into town in a beat-up Ford F-150, looking for nothing more than a decent cup of coffee and a place to disappear for a while. Marcus Cole's Ford F-150 had seen better days. The paint was faded. The bumper had a dent from a mission in Syria he didn't like to think about, and the odometer had rolled past 200,000 miles somewhere in Nevada. But the engine was solid, and that's all that mattered. As he drove down the main street of Ridgway, Montana on a crisp October morning, Marcus wasn't looking for trouble. He was running from silence. 36 years old, 6'2", with the kind of lean, coiled build that came from a decade of Delta Force operations, Marcus looked like he could be a ranch hand or a construction worker. His dark hair was cut shorter than civilian fashion, but longer than military regulation. His face was weathered, not from age but from sun and wind and the weight of things he'd seen. His eyes, a pale grey that could look almost silver in certain light, held a watchfulness that never quite turned off. Even now, driving through a quiet Montana town, those eyes were scanning, assessing, cataloguing exits and sight lines and potential threats. He wore a faded denim jacket over a plain black t-shirt, worn jeans, and boots that had walked through more countries than most people would visit in a lifetime. On his wrist was a simple watch, no smart technology, nothing that could be hacked or traced. In the glove compartment was a Sig Sauer P226, legally registered, and in a locked box in the truck bed was the rest of his gear. Old habits. Marcus had been granted a mandatory 30-day leave after his last operation. The mission itself was classified, buried under layers of security clearances and need-to-know protocols, but the nightmares it left behind weren't classified. They were vivid and relentless. Command had noticed. His team leader had noticed, and so they'd sent him home, or at least away, with orders to decompress, to remember what normal felt like. He'd chosen Ridgway almost at random, a pin on a map, a place small enough that nobody would know him, remote enough that he could think, and quiet enough that, maybe, just maybe, the noise in his head would settle down. But as he parked his truck in front of the Bluebird Diner on Main Street, Marcus noticed something that made his operator's instincts prickle. The street was too quiet. It was 9:30 on a Saturday morning. There should have been more people out, more life. Instead, the few people he saw moved quickly, heads down, eyes averted. A woman hurried her 2 children into a bookstore. An elderly man walking his dog crossed the street to avoid passing in front of a certain storefront. Marcus locked his truck and walked into the diner. The bell above the door chimed, and every head turned toward him. The conversations didn't stop exactly, but they lowered. Eyes assessed him, wary and curious. He was a stranger, and in a town this size, strangers were noticed. The diner was classic Americana. Red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floor, a long counter with chrome-edged stools, and the smell of coffee and bacon grease that had soaked into the walls over decades. A waitress in her 50s with kind eyes and tired shoulders approached with a menu. "Morning, hon," she said, her smile automatic but genuine. "Sit anywhere you like." Marcus chose a booth in the back corner, the one that gave him a clear view of both the entrance and the kitchen exit. The waitress, whose name tag read Dorothy, brought him coffee without asking. "You just passing through?" she asked, filling his cup. "Thinking about staying a few weeks," Marcus said. "Heard it was peaceful up here." Something flickered in Dorothy's expression. Not quite fear, but close. "It used to be," she said quietly, then caught herself. "I mean, it still is, mostly. What can I get you?" Marcus ordered eggs and toast, and Dorothy disappeared into the kitchen. He sipped his coffee and watched the diner. There were maybe a dozen other people scattered across the booths and counter. A family with 2 young kids, a couple of older men who looked like ranchers. Woman sitting alone, typing on a laptop. That's when he heard the motorcycles. The rumble started low and distant, then grew louder, a deliberate thunder that announced itself blocks away. The effect inside the diner was immediate. The conversation died completely. The ranchers at the counter stiffened. The mother with the 2 kids pulled them closer. Dorothy, visible through the kitchen window, closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if gathering strength. 6 motorcycles rolled past the diner's front window, chrome gleaming in the morning sun. They were Harleys, customized and expensive, and the men riding them wore black leather vests with a patch on the back, a snarling jackal's head, rendered in silver and red thread, with the words "Iron Jackals MC" arched above it. The bikes didn't stop at the diner. They continued down Main Street and pulled up in front of a hardware store 3 doors down. Marcus watched through the window as 5 of the bikers dismounted. The 6th, the one, who'd been riding point, was different from the others. He was younger, maybe 30, with dark hair slicked back and a precisely trimmed beard. He wore the same leather vest as the others, but his had an additional patch on the front. President. His name was Colt Branson, though Marcus didn't know that yet. What Marcus did notice was the way Colt moved, with an arrogant swagger that said he owned this street and everything on it. Colt and 2 of his men walked into the hardware store while the others stood guard outside, arms crossed, deliberately intimidating. "Who are they?" Marcus asked quietly when Dorothy brought his food. Dorothy glanced at the bikers, then back at Marcus. She set his plate down and lowered her voice. "The Iron Jackals. They're a motorcycle club. Been here about 6 months." She hesitated, measuring her words. "They collect protection money from the businesses. Most folks pay. It's easier that way." "Protection from what?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "From them," Dorothy said simply. She refilled his coffee, her hand shaking slightly. "Their president, Colt Branson. His daddy is Judge Harold Branson. Runs the county court. So even when the sheriff wants to do something, which ain't often, nothing sticks. Charges get dropped, evidence disappears, witnesses get scared." Before Marcus could respond, the hardware store owner, a balding man in his 60s, emerged onto the sidewalk with Colt and his men. The owner was holding an envelope, his face pale and defeated. He handed it to Colt, who opened it, counted the cash inside with theatrical slowness. then nodded. Colt said something that made his men laugh, clapped the hardware store owner on the shoulder hard enough to make the older man stumble, and then the bikers mounted up and rode off, their engines echoing between the buildings like a threat. The hardware store owner stood on the sidewalk for a long moment after they left, staring at nothing, and then went back, inside. Marcus ate his breakfast in silence, his mind working. He'd seen this before, in a dozen different countries. The formula was always the same: a power vacuum, or a corrupt system, and violent men who exploited it. The only thing that changed was the geography and the language. He'd come here for peace. He'd come here to forget. But already he could feel the familiar weight settling back onto his shoulders, the weight of seeing something wrong and knowing he had the skills to fix it. Not your fight, he told himself. Not this time. He finished his meal, left cash on the table with a generous tip for Dorothy, and walked out into the cool Montana morning. He needed to find a place to stay. The town had a small motel, but Marcus preferred something more isolated. As he walked back toward his truck, he noticed a bulletin board outside the general store. Among the flyers for church socials and used tractors for sale was a simple handwritten note. Cabin for rent, monthly rate, quiet. Call Chen Veterinary Clinic. A phone number was listed below. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed. The voice that answered was female, professional, with the slight clip of someone who was busy. Chen Veterinary Clinic, this is Maya. I'm calling about the cabin for rent. Marcus said. There was a pause. Oh, yes, it's actually my uncle's property, about 3 miles outside town. It's small, 1-bedroom, but it has electricity, running water, and a wood stove. $500 a month, first and last up front. No pets, no parties. Sounds perfect. Marcus said. When can I see it? I can meet you there in an hour if you'd like. I'll text you the address. Appreciated, Marcus said, and ended the call. The text came through a moment later with an address and simple directions. Marcus climbed into his truck and decided to drive around town for a bit, get a feel for the layout. Old habits. Ridgeway was small, maybe 3,000 people if you counted the outlying ranches. Main Street had the essentials: the diner, a general store, the hardware store, a small grocery, a gas station, a bank, a post office, and a few other businesses. Side streets branched off with residential homes, mostly older construction, well-maintained but modest. At the far end of town, Marcus spotted a low brick building with a sign. Chen Veterinary Clinic. The parking lot was empty except for a white SUV with a veterinary emblem on the door. Marcus drove past, noting the layout, and continued his circuit of the town. 40 minutes later, he followed the directions to the cabin. The road turned from pavement to gravel, climbing into the foothills where ponderosa pines grew thick and the air smelled of sap and earth. The cabin sat in a small clearing, log construction, maybe 70 years old, with a covered porch and a stone chimney. It was perfect, isolated, defensible, with clear sight lines in 3 directions. A white SUV was already parked in front. Marcus pulled up beside it and stepped out just as the driver's door opened. Dr. Maya Chen was not what he expected. She was in her early 30s, petite, maybe 5'4", with straight black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans, hiking boots, and a fleece jacket with her clinic's logo embroidered on it. Her face was striking, with high cheekbones and dark, intelligent eyes that assessed Marcus with the same careful attention he'd been giving to everything else. You must be the caller, she said, extending her hand. I'm Maya Chen. Marcus Cole, he said, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. Let me show you inside, Maya said, pulling a key from her pocket. The cabin was simple but clean. 1 main room with a kitchenette, a wood stove, and a couch that had seen better days. A bedroom barely big enough for a double bed. A bathroom with a shower that looked like it had been added sometime in the 80s. But the windows were solid, the door had a good lock, and the walls were thick. "It's not fancy," Maya said, "but it's quiet. My uncle used to use it as a hunting cabin before he passed. I keep meaning to sell it, but—" She shrugged. "Haven't gotten around to it." "It's perfect," Marcus said. "I'll take it." Maya looked surprised. "Don't you want to think about it?" "No need." They handled the paperwork in her SUV, Marcus counting out cash for the first and last month. Maya wrote him a receipt by hand, and they exchanged phone numbers. "You're not from around here," Maya observed as she filed the paperwork in a folder. "Just looking for some quiet," Marcus said. Maya studied him for a moment, and Marcus had the distinct impression she was seeing more than he wanted her to. "Well, you found the right place," she finally said. "Welcome to Ridgeway, Marcus Cole." She drove off, leaving Marcus alone with his new temporary home. Over the next 3 days, Marcus settled into a routine. He ran every morning, 8 miles through the hills, pushing his body to maintain the edge that Delta Force demanded. He chopped wood for the stove, even though there was already a cord stacked against the cabin. He read, cooked simple meals, and tried very hard not to think about the things that had earned him this mandatory leave. But Ridgeway wouldn't let him forget. On his 4th day in town, Marcus drove in for supplies. He needed food, propane, and a few other basics. As he walked down Main Street toward the general store, he saw them again. The Iron Jackals. This time there were 4 of them, parked in front of Chen Veterinary Clinic. Marcus slowed his pace. Colt Branson was standing on the clinic's front step, his arms crossed, blocking the door. 2 of his men flanked him. The 4th biker was casually leaning against Maya Chen's white SUV, preventing her from leaving. Maya herself was standing in the doorway of her clinic, her posture straight, her expression controlled but tense. Marcus was too far away to hear the conversation, but he read the body language. This was intimidation, a shakedown. He stopped at the corner, partially concealed by a storefront, and watched. Colt was talking, gesturing with his hands, his body language aggressive. Maya shook her head. Colt stepped closer. Maya stood her ground. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the steel in her spine. Then Colt said something, smiled a cruel smile, and walked back to his motorcycle. His men followed. They mounted up and rode off, engines roaring. Maya stood in her doorway for a long moment after they left, her arms wrapped around herself, then went back inside. Marcus continued to the general store, bought his supplies, and drove back to the cabin. But that night, he couldn't stop thinking about the look on Maya Chen's face. It was the same look he'd seen in 100 villages in a dozen countries, the look of someone who was trying to be brave while the ground crumbled beneath their feet. "Not your fight," he reminded himself. The next morning, Marcus ran his usual route, which took him past the edge of town. As he jogged down a side street, he saw Maya's clinic up ahead. Something was wrong. He picked up his pace. The clinic's front window was shattered. Glass littered the sidewalk. Spray paint covered the brick wall beside the door, angry red letters that read, "Pay up or else." Maya's white SUV was in the parking lot, and Maya herself was standing in front of the building, a broom in her hands, staring at the damage with an expression that was equal parts fury and despair. Marcus slowed to a walk and approached. "Dr. Chen." Maya turned, startled, then recognized him. "Marcus, hi." She gestured at the vandalized clinic with the broom. "Welcome to Ridgeway. Not quite as quiet as advertised, is it?" "What happened?" Maya's jaw tightened. "The Iron Jackals happened. They came by yesterday asking for protection money. I told them no. I guess this is their response." Marcus looked at the broken window, the spray paint, the shattered sense of security. Have you called the sheriff? Maya let out a bitter laugh. Sheriff Dawson? Sure. He'll come by, write a report, and file it somewhere it'll never be seen again. He's terrified of Judge Branson. Everyone is. Judge Branson, Marcus repeated. Colt's father. Maya looked surprised. You've been doing your homework. I pay attention. For a moment, Maya studied him with those sharp, intelligent eyes. You're not just a guy looking for quiet, are you? I'm just a guy who doesn't like bullies, Marcus said. Maya seemed to make a decision. She leaned the broom against the wall. Come inside, I'll make coffee, and I'll tell you what you're really dealing with if you stay in this town. Inside the clinic, the smell of antiseptic and animal fur hung in the air. The waiting area was small but clean, with chairs along one wall and a reception desk. Maya led Marcus past the desk and into a back room that served as both her office and a recovery area for animals. In a large, comfortable crate in the corner lay a German shepherd. The dog was awake, his dark eyes watching Marcus with calm intelligence. His right hind leg was wrapped in a bandage, and an IV line ran from his foreleg to a bag of fluids hanging from a stand. This is Atlas, Maya said softly, kneeling beside the crate. The dog's tail thumped once against the blanket. He was hit by a car 3 weeks ago. Shattered femur, internal bleeding. His owner couldn't afford the surgery, so I took him on. I've been rehabilitating him. Marcus knelt beside her. Atlas sniffed his hand, then licked it once, granting approval. He's a fighter, Maya said. Stubborn, loyal, and he doesn't give up. Kind of like me, I guess. She stood and went to a small coffee maker on a filing cabinet. The Iron Jackals started showing up about 6 months ago. At first, they were just loud, obnoxious, bar fights, speeding through town, that kind of thing. But then Colt Branson took over as president, and everything changed. They started running drugs. Meth, mostly. Then they started demanding protection money from every business in town. She poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Marcus. Most people pay. It's $100, $200 a month. Not enough to ruin you, but enough to remind you that you're not in control anymore. That they are. And you refused? Marcus said. I refused. Maya confirmed. This clinic is all I have. It's my life's work. I'm not going to let some thug with a motorcycle tell me I have to pay him for the privilege of running my own business. Her voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the fear underneath, carefully controlled. What did they say yesterday? Marcus asked. Maya's expression darkened. Colt said I had 1 week to reconsider. He said if I didn't pay, accidents happen. Clinics burn down. Animals get hurt. She glanced at Atlas. He looked right at Atlas when he said it. The threat hung in the air between them, ugly and specific. And the sheriff won't help. Marcus said. Judge Branson has been on the bench for 20 years. He's connected, powerful, and he protects his son. Colt knows he's untouchable. The sheriff knows it too. Marcus sipped his coffee, his mind already working through scenarios, tactics, responses. What are you going to do? Maya met his eyes. I'm going to keep saying no. I'm going to fix my window, paint over that graffiti, and keep running my clinic. Because if I give in, then they win. And if they win with me, they'll win with everyone else too. Someone has to stand up. There it was. The same courage Marcus had seen in interpreters in Afghanistan, in village elders in Iraq, in ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances who decided that enough was enough. You're going to get hurt, Marcus said quietly. Probably, Maya agreed. But I can't live in fear, and I can't let them destroy this town. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You probably think I'm naive or stupid. No, Marcus said. I think you're brave, and I think you're right. Someone does need to stand up. Maya looked at him curiously. You sound like you've seen this before. Different places, Marcus said carefully. Same patterns? They talked for another 20 minutes. Marcus helped her board up the broken window with plywood from her storage shed. He didn't say much, but Maya seemed grateful for the company and the help. As Marcus was leaving, Maya called after him. Marcus, thank you for helping and for listening. Anytime, Marcus said. He drove back to the cabin, but he couldn't settle. He tried to read, tried to focus on the silence he'd come here to find, but his mind kept circling back to Maya Chen and her German shepherd, to the smashed window and the spray-painted threat, to the pattern he'd seen play out in too many places. Not your fight, he told himself one more time. But it was starting to feel like a lie. 3 days passed. Marcus kept to his routine, but he altered his morning run to take him past the clinic. Just checking, he told himself. Just being aware. On the 3rd day, a Tuesday afternoon, Marcus was in town buying coffee at the general store when he heard shouting outside. He walked to the window and felt ice flood his veins. In the clinic parking lot across the street, Maya Chen was on her knees on the pavement. Standing over her was Colt Branson and 4 of his iron jackals. And lying beside Maya, whimpering in pain, was Atlas. The German shepherd was trying to stand, trying to protect Maya, but his injured leg wouldn't support his weight. Colt Branson raised his steel-toed boot and kicked Atlas in the ribs. The dog yelped, a sound of pure agony. Maya screamed and threw herself over Atlas, covering the dog's body with her own. Colt laughed. His men laughed. And Marcus Cole was already moving. He dropped his coffee and bolted out of the general store. His boots hit the pavement in a dead sprint. His mind was cold, clear, tactical. 5 targets. Colt was armed. He could see the bulge of a pistol under his leather vest. Probably at least 2 of the others were armed as well. Civilians in the area. Wounded dog. Vulnerable victim. The distance was 70 yards. Marcus covered it in seconds. Colt was raising his boot again, aiming another kick at Atlas. Maya was crying, her body shielding the dog, her hands covering Atlas's head. "Please!" she was begging. "Please stop. I'll pay. Just don't hurt him." "Too late for that, Doc," Colt said. His voice was loud enough that Marcus could hear it. "You had your chance. Now you get to watch your dog die, and then we're going to burn your clinic to the ground." That's when Colt heard the footsteps. Fast, hard, purposeful. He turned, and his eyes locked onto Marcus Cole sprinting toward them at full speed. For just a split second, something flickered in Colt's expression. Not fear, not yet, but recognition that something unexpected was happening. Colt's hand went to his waistband. He pulled out a gold-plated Colt 45, a gaudy showpiece that probably cost more than Marcus's truck. He aimed it directly at Marcus's chest. Marcus didn't slow down. The 4 other bikers moved to flank Colt, spreading out in a semicircle. They were used to intimidation, used to people backing down. Marcus stopped 10 feet away. He wasn't breathing hard despite the sprint. His grey eyes were locked on Colt, and his expression was absolutely calm. The parking lot had gone silent. People were watching from windows, from doorways, frozen in fear or shock or both. Maya was still on the ground, her arms around Atlas, looking up at Marcus with wide, terrified eyes. Colt's finger was on the trigger. The gold pistol glinted in the afternoon sun. He smiled, a predator's smile, full of cruelty and confidence. "You picked the wrong day to be a hero, friend," Colt said. Marcus didn't respond. He just looked at Colt, and then he said 5 words in a voice that was quiet, controlled, and absolutely lethal. "You just made a mistake." Colt Branson had spent his entire life getting away with things. As a teenager, he'd wrecked his mother's Mercedes while drunk, and his father had made the charges disappear. In his 20s, he'd put a man in the hospital during a bar fight and walked away without seeing the inside of a cell. When he took over the Iron Jackals, he'd built an empire of fear and violence, and not once had anyone made him pay for it. So when this stranger, this nobody in a faded jacket, told him he'd made a mistake, Colt did what he always did. He laughed. A mistake? Colt's voice was loud, theatrical, playing to his men and the hidden audience watching from windows and doorways. The only mistake here is you thinking you're going to walk away from this. He raised the gold-plated pistol higher, making sure Marcus could see it, making sure everyone could see it. You see this? This is a custom Colt 1911, gold-plated ivory grips. Cost me $4,000. And I am going to put a bullet right through your chest if you don't turn around and walk away right now. Marcus didn't move, didn't blink. His eyes, that pale grey that looked almost silver in the afternoon light, remained locked on Colt's face with an intensity that was starting to make the biker uncomfortable. I'm not walking away, Marcus said quietly. Behind Colt, his 4 men shifted their weight, hands moving toward weapons. They were trying to look menacing, but Marcus had already assessed each of them in the 3 seconds it had taken to close the distance. The one on the far left, heavy-set with a scarred face, had a knife clipped to his belt. The 2 in the middle were younger, probably in their 20s, trying to look tough, but their posture was all wrong. No real combat training. The one on the right, older, with grey in his beard, had the outline of a pistol in his jacket pocket. Maya was still on the ground, her arms protectively wrapped around Atlas. The German shepherd was whimpering softly, his brown eyes glazed with pain. One of Colt's earlier kicks had reopened the surgical site on the dog's leg, and blood was beginning to seep through the white bandage. "Last chance, hero," Colt said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Walk away or die." What happened next would be replayed in the minds of everyone watching for the rest of their lives. Marcus moved, not backward, forward. He took 2 quick steps that closed the 10-foot gap to 7 feet before Colt's brain even registered the motion. In the same fluid movement, Marcus's left hand came up and across, a sharp chopping motion that struck Colt's wrist exactly on the radial nerve. The gold pistol discharged, the shot going wide, the bullet embedding itself harmlessly in the pavement 3 feet to the left. Before the sound of the gunshot had finished echoing, Marcus's right hand had seized Colt's wrist, twisting it in a direction wrists weren't meant to go. There was a wet pop as ligaments tore. Colt screamed. The pistol clattered to the ground. Marcus didn't let go. He used Colt's own momentum and the leverage of the wrist lock to spin the biker around, slamming him face first into the hood of Maya's white SUV. The impact was controlled, but devastating. Colt's nose shattered against the metal with a sickening crunch. Blood exploded across the white paint. The entire sequence, from the moment Marcus moved to the moment Colt's face hit the hood, took less than 2 seconds. The 4 other Iron Jackals stood frozen for a critical half-second, their brains struggling to process what they'd just witnessed. Their president, their invincible leader, was on the ground, bleeding and moaning. That half-second cost them everything. The heavy-set biker with the scarred face recovered first. He yanked the knife from his belt clip, a 4-inch fixed blade, and lunged at Marcus with a wild overhand strike aimed at his neck. Marcus sidestepped the clumsy attack, the blade passing inches from his throat. He trapped the biker's extended arm with his left hand, simultaneously driving his right elbow up into the man's armpit. There was another pop, this one louder, as the shoulder dislocated. The knife fell. The biker screamed and dropped to his knees, his useless arm hanging at his side. The 2 younger bikers came at Marcus together, trying to use numbers to their advantage. The first one threw a haymaker punch, his entire body telegraphing the move a full second before his fist arrived. Marcus ducked under it, stepped inside the biker's guard, and delivered a palm heel strike to the solar plexus. The younger man's eyes went wide. all the air in his lungs evacuated in a single, whooshing gasp. He collapsed, unable to breathe, his diaphragm temporarily paralyzed. The second young biker, seeing his friend go down, hesitated. It was his last conscious decision for a while. Marcus pivoted and delivered a precise kick to the side of the man's knee. Not hard enough to shatter it, but hard enough. The knee buckled inward, and the biker went down with a howl of agony, clutching his leg. 4 down. The fifth biker, the older one with the grey beard and the gun in his pocket, finally got his weapon out. It was a snub-nosed .38 revolver, and his hand was shaking as he raised it, trying to get a bead on Marcus. Marcus was already moving. He closed the distance in 2 long strides, his left hand coming down on the biker's gun hand, controlling the weapon and pointing it safely towards the sky. His right hand drove forward in a short, brutal punch to the man's throat. Not hard enough to crush the windpipe, but hard enough to make the man think he was dying. The biker dropped the revolver and fell to his knees, both hands clutching his throat, gagging and retching. Marcus stepped back, picking up both the revolver and Colt's gold-plated pistol from where they lay on the pavement. He ejected the magazines, cleared the chambers, and pocketed the ammunition. Then he tossed the empty weapons into a nearby trash can. The entire fight, from the moment Colt pulled his gun to the moment Marcus disarmed the last biker, had taken less than 15 seconds. The parking lot was utterly silent, except for the groaning of the injured bikers. Colt Branson was trying to push himself up from the pavement, blood streaming from his shattered nose. His eyes, wild with pain and rage, and for the first time in his life, genuine fear, found Marcus. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Colt's voice was thick, distorted by his broken nose. "My father is Judge Harold Branson. He owns this town. He owns the sheriff. You just assaulted 5 people in broad daylight. You're going to prison for the rest of your life." Marcus walked over to where Colt lay and crouched down, bringing his face level with the bikers. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost conversational, but every word carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said. "You and your friends are going to get on your motorcycles and leave. You're going to stay away from Dr. Chen. You're going to stay away from her clinic. You're going to stay away from that dog, and if I ever see you near her again, what I just did to you will feel like a gentle warning compared to what comes next. You don't know who you're messing with." Colt spat, blood and saliva flying from his mouth. Marcus's expression didn't change. "Yes, I do. You're a coward who beats up women and kicks injured dogs because your daddy is a judge, and you think that makes you untouchable. But here's what you don't understand. I don't care about your father. I don't care about his connections. And I don't care about whatever corrupt system you think protects you." He leaned in closer, his grey eyes boring into Colt's. "I've dealt with warlords, cartel bosses, and terrorists who make you look like a playground bully. And every single one of them thought they were untouchable too. You want to find out what happened to them?" Colt said nothing. For the first time in his adult life, he had nothing to say. "Get your men and get out of here," Marcus said, standing up. It took Colt and his iron jackals 5 painful minutes to collect themselves. The biker with the dislocated shoulder had to be helped to his motorcycle by one of the younger ones. The heavy-set biker with the knife could barely walk. They were a pathetic sight. These men who had terrorized an entire town, now limping and bleeding and broken. Before they rode off, Colt looked back at Marcus one more time. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes," Marcus replied calmly. "It is." The motorcycles roared to life and disappeared down Main Street, their engines sounding less like thunder now and more like the retreat of a defeated army. As soon as they were gone, Marcus turned to Maya. She was still on the ground, still cradling Atlas, tears streaming down her face. But she wasn't crying from fear anymore. She was crying from relief and shock and the overwhelming emotional release of someone who had been certain she was about to watch her dog die. Marcus knelt beside her. "Let me see him." Maya loosened her grip, and Marcus gently examined Atlas. The dog's breathing was labored, and the bleeding from his leg was more severe than Marcus had initially thought. The kick had torn several stitches. "We need to get him inside," Marcus said. "Now!" Together, Marcus and Maya carefully lifted Atlas. The dog whimpered, but didn't resist. He seemed to understand that these hands, unlike the ones that had hurt him, were there to help. They carried him into the clinic and placed him on an examination table. Maya, her hand still shaking, immediately went into professional mode. She grabbed supplies, set up an IV line, administered pain medication. Her movements were practiced and efficient, muscle memory taking over when conscious thought was compromised by adrenaline. Marcus stood back, giving her space to work, but ready to help, if needed. "Talk to me," Maya said as she worked, her voice steadier now. "Keep me grounded. Who are you, really, Marcus Cole?" "Right now I'm just a guy who doesn't like seeing animals get hurt," Marcus said. "Nobody moves like that," Maya replied, her hands working to repair the torn stitches. "Nobody takes down 5 armed men in 15 seconds unless they've had serious training. Military?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. What kind?" "The kind I can't talk about." Maya glanced at him, and despite the situation, a small smile touched her lips. "Special Forces. Something like that. And you just happened to be in Ridgeway, Montana, renting my uncle's cabin when all this happened?" 30-day leave," Marcus said. "I came here for peace and quiet." "Well," Maya said, tying off the last suture, "you picked the wrong town." Atlas's breathing was evening out now, the pain medication taking effect. His brown eyes found Marcus, and his tail gave a single weak thump against the table. "He's thanking you," Maya said softly. "He's a good dog," Marcus replied. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. Then Maya spoke, her voice small and worried. "Colt wasn't lying about his father. Judge Branson really does own this town. The sheriff, the prosecutor, half the town council. What you just did, defending me, they're going to twist it. They're going to make you the criminal." "Let them try," Marcus said. "You don't understand. They'll file charges, assault, battery, weapons charges if they can manufacture them. You'll be arrested, and once you're in the system, Judge Branson will make sure you never get out." Marcus looked at her calmly. "Maya, I appreciate the warning, but I've been in worse situations with worse people. Trust me when I say that a corrupt small-town judge is not going to be a problem." Before Maya could respond, the front door of the clinic opened. Both of them turned, tensing. But it wasn't the Iron Jackals returning for round 2. It was Sheriff Tom Dawson. Dawson was in his late 50s, with a weathered face and grey hair under his sheriff's hat. He wore the standard khaki uniform of the county sheriff's department, and the gun on his hip looked like it hadn't been drawn in years. He stepped into the clinic slowly, his eyes taking in the scene. Maya, still in her blood-stained clothes, Marcus standing protectively near her, and Atlas, sedated on the examination table. "Dr. Chen," the sheriff said, his voice carefully neutral. "I got reports of gunfire and a disturbance in your parking lot." "That's right," Maya said, her chin lifting defiantly. "Colt Branson and 4 of his men attacked me and my dog. This man, Marcus Cole, intervened and stopped them." Sheriff Dawson's gaze shifted to Marcus, assessing him with the wary eyes of a man who had learned to be very careful about choosing sides. "That's your version of events." "That's not a version," Marcus said calmly. "That's what happened. There are at least a dozen witnesses, people watching from the hardware store, the general store, the diner. They all saw Colt kick an injured dog and threaten Dr. Chen." And then you assaulted 5 men. Dawson said, I defended a civilian and an animal from an immediate threat. Marcus corrected. Colt Branson discharged a firearm in a public place. He and his men had deadly weapons. Dr. Chen was on the ground, defenseless. I used appropriate force to end the threat. The sheriff's jaw tightened. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a very steep cliff, trying to decide which way to jump. Mr. Cole, you're new in town, so maybe you don't understand how things work here. I understand perfectly, Marcus said, his voice hardening. A criminal organization has been terrorizing this town for 6 months. They extort money, they deal drugs, and they assault people. And the reason they get away with it is because the judge who's supposed to uphold the law is protecting his criminal son. Sheriff Dawson's face flushed. Now you listen here. No, Marcus interrupted, stepping forward. He wasn't aggressive, but his presence filled the room. You listen. I've been in this town less than a week, and I've seen enough to know what's happening. You're a good man in an impossible situation. I can see it in your eyes. You hate what this town has become, but you're scared. Scared of losing your job. Scared of what Judge Branson will do, and I understand that. Fear is a powerful thing. The sheriff opened his mouth, then closed it. But here's what's going to happen now. Marcus continued. You're going to go back to your office and write a report. A truthful report. You're going to document that Colt Branson and 4 members of the Iron Jackals attacked Dr. Chen and her dog in broad daylight. That Colt discharged a firearm in a public place. That multiple witnesses can corroborate the events, and that I intervened to stop an assault in progress. And if I don't? Dawson asked quietly. Then I'll file the report myself, with the FBI, with the DEA, with the State Attorney General. I'll make enough noise that even Judge Branson won't be able to sweep it under the rug. For a long moment, Sheriff Dawson stood there, his hand resting on his duty belt, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Then, slowly, something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, but Maya saw it. Marcus saw it. It was the look of a man who had been waiting for someone, anyone, to give him permission to do the right thing. I'll write the report, Dawson said finally. He looked at Maya. Dr. Chen, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what happened to you, and I'm sorry I didn't stop it sooner. Maya nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. Dawson turned to leave, then paused at the door. Mr. Cole, Judge Branson is going to come after you with everything he has. Legal, illegal, it won't matter. He's going to try to destroy you. He can. Try, Marcus said. After the sheriff left, Maya sank into a chair, the adrenaline finally draining out of her. What have we done? She whispered. What have you done? Colt was right. This isn't over. They're going to come after you, after both of us. Marcus pulled up a chair and sat across from her. Maya, I need you to understand something. Men like Colt Branson, men like his father, they survive because good people are too afraid to stand up to them. They count on fear. They count on isolation. They count on everyone believing they're too powerful to fight. But they are powerful, Maya said. No, Marcus said firmly. They have power, but only because people give it to them. And the moment someone stands up and says, no more, that power starts to crumble. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, Marcus admitted. It's dangerous. It's messy. People might get hurt, but the alternative is living in fear forever. Is that the life you want? Is that the town you want? Maya looked at Atlas, who was sleeping peacefully now, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She thought about the last 6 months, about watching her town slowly suffocate under the weight of the Iron Jackal's terror. She thought about the broken window, the spray-painted threats, the moment Colt's boot connected with Atlas's ribs. No, she said finally, her voice growing stronger. That's not the life I want. Then we fight. Marcus said. We. I'm not going anywhere, Marcus said. Not until this is finished. Maya looked at him, this stranger who had appeared in her town like some kind of guardian angel, and she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Okay, she said. We fight, but I need to know one thing. You said you're military, special forces, the kind you can't talk about. Are you someone who can actually take on a corrupt judge and a criminal motorcycle gang? Because if we're doing this, I need to know we have a chance. Marcus met her eyes, and for the first time since they'd met, he let her see a glimpse of who he really was. Not Marcus Cole, the quiet stranger looking for peace, but the operator, the Delta Force soldier, the man who had been trained to dismantle organizations far more dangerous than a small-town crime syndicate. I'm someone who has taken down terror networks, dismantled drug cartels, and survived situations that would break most people, Marcus said quietly. A biker gang and a corrupt judge? That's just another Tuesday. Despite everything, Maya laughed. It was a short, almost hysterical sound, but it was genuine. Okay then, she said, extending her hand. Partners? Marcus shook her hand. Partners? Neither of them knew it yet, but across town, in a large house on the hill overlooking Ridgeway, Judge Harold Branson was receiving a phone call from his son. Colt's voice was thick with pain and rage as he described what had happened, as he described the man who had humiliated him, who had beaten him and his men in front of the entire town. Judge Branson listened in silence, his face growing darker with each word. When Colt finished, the judge made a single phone call. Not to the sheriff, not to the prosecutor. To someone else. Someone whose methods weren't constrained by law or ethics. The war was just beginning. The call came at 11:47 that night. Marcus was sitting on the porch of his cabin, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands, when his burner phone buzzed. The number was blocked, but he knew who it was before he answered. He'd been expecting this. Cole, he said, his voice neutral. Sergeant Cole. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, with the particular cadence of military communications. This is Captain Lisa Cordero, JAG Corps, Fort Bragg. I'm calling on behalf of Major General Patterson. Marcus sat up straighter. General Patterson was his commanding officer, the man who oversaw his unit's operations. If JAG was calling him on the general's behalf, something had escalated fast. Go ahead, Captain, Marcus said. Sir, we've received a formal complaint through military channels regarding your conduct while on leave. A Judge Harold Branson of Montana has filed paperwork alleging that you assaulted his son and 4 other civilians without provocation. He's demanding that you be recalled to base immediately for disciplinary action and that you face court-martial proceedings. Marcus felt a cold smile touch his lips. So that was how Branson wanted to play it. Skip the local system entirely and go straight for his military career. Captain, I assume you've read the complaint in detail? Marcus asked. I have, sir. And? There was a pause. When Captain Cordero spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly. Less formal, more human. And it reads like a poorly written work of fiction. Judge Branson claims you initiated an unprovoked attack on 5 unarmed men in a public parking lot. He's provided sworn statements from his son and the other alleged victims. However, he's conveniently failed to mention why you were there or what preceded the altercation. There were at least a dozen civilian witnesses. Marcus said, a veterinarian named Dr. Maya Chen can provide a full account. Sheriff Tom Dawson was on scene immediately after and took statements. I'm aware, Cordero said. I've already spoken with Sheriff Dawson. Off the record, he told me what really happened. He also told me that Judge Branson has been pressuring him to change his report. Has he changed it? No, sir. Sheriff Dawson may be scared, but he's also fed up. He's sitting on the most complete and accurate report of his career. But here's the problem. Judge Branson has reach. He's called in favors with the state senator who sits on the Armed Services Committee. That senator made a call to the Pentagon. The Pentagon called General Patterson. And now I'm calling you." Marcus stood up, walked to the edge of the porch, and looked out at the dark Montana wilderness. "What does the general want me to do?" "Officially, he wants you to return to base for a formal inquiry. Unofficially?" Cordero's voice dropped. "He told me to tell you, and I'm quoting here. Tell Cole that if he's stepped in something, I trust he knows how to finish the job. But tell him to do it by the book, because I can't protect him if he goes cowboy." Marcus allowed himself a genuine smile. General Patterson was a warrior's warrior. He understood that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing weren't perfectly aligned, but he also understood the importance of staying within bounds. "Tell the general I copy that," Marcus said. "And tell him I'll have this resolved within 72 hours. "Resolved how, sir?" "By the book, Captain. Completely by the book." After Cordero hung up, Marcus made 3 more phone calls. The first was to an old friend from his Delta days, who now worked with the DEA. The second was to a contact at the FBI's field office in Montana. The third was to a military intelligence analyst who owed him several favors. He gave each of them the same information. Ridgway, Montana. The Iron Jackals Motorcycle Club. Judge Harold Branson. And he asked each of them the same question. "What can you find?" Then he drove back into town. The lights were still on at Chen Veterinary Clinic. Maya's white SUV was in the parking lot, and through the window Marcus could see her moving around inside, checking on Atlas and the other animals in her care. He knocked softly on the door. Maya opened it, surprised to see him. "Marcus, it's almost midnight." "We need to talk," Marcus said. "Judge Branson is making his move." They sat in her office, and Marcus explained the phone call, the formal complaint, the pressure being applied through military channels. Maya listened, her face growing paler with each revelation. "This is my fault," she said when he finished. "You got involved because of me. Now they're trying to destroy your career." "They're trying," Marcus corrected. "They haven't succeeded yet. And they won't." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've dealt with men like Harold Branson before. They're used to operating in darkness, using fear and intimidation and the threat of their power to keep people in line. But they forget that darkness works both ways. They've been hiding things, and now someone's about to turn on the lights." Maya leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Judge Branson isn't just protecting his son, he's protecting himself. A biker gang doesn't run drugs and extortion rackets in a town for 6 months without the local judge noticing, unless that judge is being paid not to notice." "You think Branson is on the take?" "I know he is," Marcus said. "I just need to prove it." The next morning, Marcus was having breakfast at the Bluebird Diner when Sheriff Dawson slid into the booth across from him. The sheriff looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red-rimmed and his uniform was rumpled. "We need to talk," Dawson said quietly. "I'm listening." "Judge Branson called me at 6 this morning. He wants me to arrest you for assault, battery, and reckless endangerment. He's got warrants drawn up and everything." "Are you going to arrest me?" Marcus asked calmly, taking a sip of his coffee. Dawson shook his head slowly. "No, because those warrants are fraudulent. He's signed them himself, which he can do technically, but he's also the father of one of the alleged victims. That's a massive conflict of interest. Any decent lawyer would get them thrown out in about 10 minutes. So why does he think it'll work? Because in Ridgway it always has." Dawson said bitterly. "He signs a warrant, I make an arrest, he sets bail impossibly high, and the person sits in jail until they agree to whatever deal he offers. It's how he's kept the Iron Jackals operating. Anyone who crossed them got arrested on bogus charges and disappeared into the system." "But you're not playing along this time." "No," Dawson said. And there was something like defiance in his voice now. I'm not. Because what you did yesterday, standing up to Colt and his men, it reminded me why I became a sheriff in the first place. It wasn't to be a judge's errand boy. It was to protect people. Marcus studied the older man. What do you need from me? Help, Dawson said simply. I've been documenting things for years. Little things, irregularities in the judge's rulings, cases that got dismissed without explanation. Financial records that don't add up. I've got boxes of files in my garage that I've been too scared to do anything with. But if you're really who I think you are, if you really have the connections you implied yesterday, maybe together we can finally bring him down. Marcus extended his hand across the table. Show me what you've got. For the next 8 hours, Marcus and Sheriff Dawson sat in the sheriff's garage, going through years of accumulated evidence. Bank statements showing deposits to Branson's accounts that corresponded with major drug shipments moving through the county. Court transcripts showing cases dismissed against known Iron Jackal members. Property records showing the judge owned 3 warehouses on the outskirts of town that he rented to shell corporations that, when traced, led back to the motorcycle club. It was all there, a complete picture of corruption that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Why didn't you take this to the state attorney general? Marcus asked. I tried, Dawson said wearily. 3 years ago. Sent a whole package of evidence. 2 weeks later, the Attorney General's office sent me a letter saying they'd reviewed my allegations and found them without merit. Then Judge Branson called me into his chambers and told me that if I ever tried something like that again, I'd lose my job, my pension, and probably my freedom. He had enough dirt on me, real or manufactured, to make it stick. So you've been sitting on all this waiting. Waiting for someone like you, Dawson said. Someone who isn't afraid. Someone who can't be bought or threatened. Marcus pulled out his phone and took photographs of every document, every bank statement, every piece of evidence. Then he sent it all, encrypted, to his contacts at the DEA and FBI. By late afternoon, his phone rang. It was his DEA contact, a hard-nosed agent named Rodriguez, who Marcus had worked with on operations in Colombia. Cole, where the hell did you find this? Rodriguez's voice was excited, the kind of excitement that came from a hunter who'd just found a blood trail. Small town in Montana. Marcus said, How solid is it? Solid enough that I've already got approval to open a federal investigation. We're talking RICO charges, money laundering, drug trafficking, public corruption. This Judge Branson has been running a criminal enterprise under the cover of his bench for at least 5 years, maybe longer. How fast can you move? I can have a team in Ridgeway by tomorrow morning. But Cole, I need you to keep your head down until we get there. If Branson gets wind of a federal investigation, he'll rab it. All his records will disappear, witnesses will recant, and we'll be left with nothing. Understood, Marcus said. But Rodriguez, you need to move fast. Branson's already trying to have me arrested on false charges. If he succeeds, if he gets me into his system, it'll compromise everything. Then don't get arrested, Rodriguez said. I'll see you tomorrow. That night, Marcus didn't go back to his cabin. He stayed at the clinic with Maya, helping her with the evening feeding, checking on Atlas, who was recovering remarkably well. The German shepherd was standing now, putting weight on his injured leg, his tail wagging whenever Marcus came near. He knows you saved him, Maya said, watching the dog press his head against Marcus's hand. He's a fighter, Marcus said, like his doctor. Maya smiled, but it faded quickly. Marcus, what happens tomorrow? Tomorrow the federal government comes to town, and Judge Harold Branson's empire crumbles. And Colt? The Iron Jackals? They'll go down with him. The DEA doesn't just want the dirty judge, they want the whole organization. Maya was quiet for a moment. And then what? You leave? You go back to your unit, your missions, your real life? Marcus looked at her, at this brave woman who had stood up when everyone else had bent, who had refused to be broken even when violence came to her door. "I don't know," he admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead." "Well," Maya said softly, "when you do think about it, remember that Ridgway could use someone like you. Permanently." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of motorcycles echoed through the night. Multiple engines getting closer. Marcus moved to the window. 6 motorcycles were rolling down Main Street, heading straight for the clinic. At the front was Colt Branson, his face still bruised and swollen from their encounter, a white bandage across his broken nose. They were coming for a final confrontation, one last desperate attempt to salvage their crumbling power. Maya's hand found Marcus's arm. "What do we do?" Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, he said clearly, "This is Marcus Cole at Chen Veterinary Clinic on Main Street. 6 armed men on motorcycles are approaching the building with hostile intent. I need Sheriff Dawson here now, and tell him to bring everyone he's got." Then he looked at Maya. "You and Atlas go to the back room. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "Marcus, go," he said firmly. "Trust me." The motorcycles stopped in front of the clinic. Colt and his 5 remaining able-bodied iron jackals dismounted. In Colt's hand was a baseball bat. In the hands of his men were crowbars, chains, and 1 shotgun. This wasn't intimidation. This was revenge. This was desperation. This was the last violent gasp of men who could feel their world collapsing. Marcus stepped out onto the clinic's front step. He was unarmed, calm, and completely unafraid. Colt raised the baseball bat. "You should have left town when you had the chance." "Probably," Marcus agreed. "But I didn't." That's when the sirens started. Not just one. Multiple police vehicles coming from every direction. Colt's head snapped around, confusion and then panic flooding his bruised face. Sheriff Dawson's cruiser screeched to a stop, blocking the street. Behind him came 2 more county sheriff's vehicles, and then, emerging from the darkness like avenging angels, 3 black SUVs with federal plates. Men and women in FBI and DEA jackets poured out, weapons drawn, voices sharp with authority. "Drop your weapons! Hands in the air! Now!" The iron jackals froze. Colt's baseball bat clattered to the pavement. Agent Rodriguez stepped forward, his badge held high. "Colt Branson, you're under arrest for drug trafficking, assault, witness intimidation, and about 15 other charges I'm going to enjoy reading to you." As federal agents moved in to handcuff the bikers, another vehicle pulled up. This one was a county sheriff's cruiser, but the man who stepped out wasn't in uniform. It was Judge Harold Branson. He was in his 60s, tall and distinguished, with silver hair and the kind of face that belonged in campaign commercials. He strode forward with absolute confidence, a man who had never been told no in his entire career. "What is the meaning of this?" His voice boomed with authority. "I'm Judge Branson. I demand to know who authorized this operation." Rodriguez turned to face him, and his smile was predatory. "I did. Special Agent Miguel Rodriguez, DEA, and Judge Branson, you're also under arrest." The color drained from Branson's face. "On what charges?" "Corruption, money laundering, racketeering, and operating a criminal enterprise. Should I continue?" For the first time in his life, Judge Harold. Branson had no response. As the federal agents led both Branson and his son away in handcuffs, Sheriff Dawson walked over to Marcus. The older man's eyes were wet, but he was smiling. "It's over," Dawson said. "After all these years, it's finally over." Marcus nodded. "It's over." Inside the clinic, Maya emerged from the back room, Atlas limping beside her. She looked at the scene outside, the federal agents, the arrested bikers, the father and son being loaded into separate vehicles. She looked at Marcus, and without a word, she hugged him. Tomorrow would bring reporters, questions, official statements, and the long process of justice. But tonight, Ridgway was free.